You shouldn't be here. Jessica doesn't want you to attend. Those were the exact words my mother, Linda Carter, said to me as I stood at the entrance of a breathtaking oceanfront villa in Malibu, California. I just froze in my tracks. I had flown all the way from my home in Austin, Texas, clutching a ridiculously expensive wedding gift and wearing a simple but elegant dress I bought specifically for this occasion. I came with the naive hope of finally mending the fractured relationship with my family. Instead, I was met by my own mother acting like a nightclub bouncer, physically blocking me from walking into my older brother's wedding. I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. Over her shoulder, I could clearly see the extravagant setup. There were hundreds of guests laughing and mingling on the pristine lawn. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms were carrying trays of food around a massive champagne tower that caught the afternoon California sun. It sparkled almost as loudly as the live band playing smooth jazz in the background. It looked like a scene straight out of a movie. And there I was, standing on the outside looking in. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "It's Brandon's wedding. Is this some kind of joke?" My mother didn't even flinch. "It's no joke, Olivia. You shouldn't be here." "Where is Brandon?" I demanded, feeling a hot flush of embarrassment creeping up my neck. "Let me talk to him. Does he know you're doing this?" "He is busy," my mother snapped, shutting down the conversation completely. "He is getting ready to marry the love of his life and doesn't have time for this." Just then, a member of the venue's security staff stepped up right behind my mother and firmly asked me to leave. He didn't yell, but his presence was a clear threat. I was being kicked out. My own mother had security remove me, forcing me to stand outside like a trespasser while arriving guests openly stared at me. I looked down at the heavy box in my hands. Defeated and totally humiliated, I slowly placed my wedding gift down on an entry table and walked away without another word. That walk back to my rental car was the longest walk of my entire 27 years of life. I didn't cry. I was too in shock to cry. I just got in my car, drove straight to the airport, and waited for a flight back to Texas. Let me back up a little bit so you understand how messed up this dynamic really is. My name is Olivia Carter. I am 27 years old, and I work as a software engineer for a tech company in Austin, Texas. It's a demanding job, but it pays well, and I've built a comfortable, independent life for myself out here. I love my apartment, I love my routine, and I usually love my Monday mornings. I've always prided myself on being a hard-working, fiercely independent person who always steps up to help the family when they need it. I had to be that way. Ever since we were kids, my older brother Brandon, who is 33 now, was the absolute center of my parents' universe. Brandon is an adult, but in my mother's eyes, he is still a flawless angel who deserves the world handed to him. She is the type of mother who will defend and favor her son no matter what he does. My dad, Robert Carter, is a quiet man who rarely speaks up and almost always just sides with his wife to keep the peace. Growing up, if there was extra money, it went to Brandon. I paid my own way through college. When I graduated and landed a great job in tech, my family's attitude toward me shifted slightly. I wasn't suddenly loved more, but I became incredibly useful. Whenever they needed money, I was expected to open my wallet. For years, the family has always favored Brandon while treating me like an afterthought. When Brandon got engaged to Jessica Miller, the family dynamic went from bad to incredibly toxic. Jessica is someone who demands total control and attention. She and I never clicked. Whenever I tried to set financial boundaries with them, Jessica would throw a fit, and my mother would accuse me of being an unsupportive sister. That's why my relationship with them was hanging by a thread, and why I flew to California in the first place, desperately trying to fix things. I spent the rest of that weekend alone in my small Austin apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the absolute rejection. I decided right then and there that I was done. I was cutting them off. No more reaching out. No more trying to fix things, no more being the backup plan for their mistakes. I was just going to focus on my career and my own life. Then came Monday morning. It was exactly 4 days after the wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee and opening my laptop to start checking work emails. I was just getting ready to go to work when my phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID showed a Los Angeles area code. I assumed it was a recruiter, but for some reason I answered it. "Hello," I said. "Good morning. Is this Olivia Carter?" a polite woman's voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "Hi, Ms. Carter. I am calling from the luxury wedding venue in Malibu," the manager said smoothly. "I hope you had a wonderful time celebrating your brother's wedding this past weekend." I frowned, gripping my coffee mug. "I actually didn't attend," I said flatly. "Is there something you need?" There was a brief pause on the line, and then the manager spoke again, her tone shifting to strict business. "Oh, I see. Well, I am calling regarding the final balance on the Carter Miller wedding account. Ms. Carter, the remaining balance for your brother's wedding is $72,400. I literally dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, hot liquid splashing everywhere, but I didn't even flinch. My heart stopped beating for a solid 5 seconds. "Would you like to pay that today?" the manager asked casually, as if she were asking me to cover a $20 lunch tab. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" I gasped, my voice completely abandoning me. $72,000? For what? I honestly thought you were calling the wrong person. The manager's voice lost its warmth entirely. "There is no mistake, Ms. Carter. You are the financial guarantor in the wedding contract." I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the broken pieces of my mug on the floor, while her words echoed in my head. I was completely paralyzed, absolutely dumbfounded. I was officially being put on the hook for $72,000 for a wedding that I had just been thrown out of 4 days ago. The sheer audacity of it made my head spin. I had swallowed my pride, bought an expensive gift, and flown across the country just to be treated like garbage by my own mother. And now, this venue was demanding a life-changing amount of money from me. I could feel a mix of intense anger and absolute panic rising in my chest. Who in their right mind would sign me up for this? How did they even get my information? My hands started to shake as I asked the venue manager to send me a copy of whatever contract she was looking at. Little did I know, the nightmare was just getting started. I asked the manager on the phone to email me everything she had on file immediately. I gave her my email address, and she told me she was sending over the signed contract and the billing breakdown right then and there. I hung up the phone and just stood in the middle of my kitchen. I completely ignored the spilled dark coffee and the broken pieces of my favorite ceramic mug on the floor. The apartment was completely quiet, and I could only hear my own heavy breathing. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this could possibly be real. My phone pinged almost instantly. It was an email from the wedding planner at the Malibu venue, and it contained several PDF attachments. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the device steady enough to tap the screen and open the first document. I took a deep breath, tapped the file, and watched the official wedding contract load on my screen. I immediately scrolled down past all the legal terms to the financial guarantor section. Sure enough, all my personal information was typed out perfectly on the screen. The contract had my full legal name, Olivia Carter, my personal email address, and my direct cell phone number. They even had my current apartment address in Austin, Texas. It was strange to see my own life detailed on a bill I never agreed to. But then I scrolled down to the very bottom of the page to look at the signature line. There on the screen was the name Olivia Carter, signed in black digital ink. I felt sick to my stomach. That was absolutely not my signature. I always print my name in clean, block letters. I have done that since high school. But this signature was written in a loopy, slanted cursive that I had never used a day in my life. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing the fake letters over and over again. Someone in my family had actually forged my signature on a legally binding document for a luxury wedding venue. I was staring at a crime, committed by my own family. I closed that document, feeling completely numb, and opened the next attachment. This one was the itemized invoice for the wedding reception. I needed to see exactly how they managed to spend such an insane amount of money for a single night. The breakdown was disgusting to read. The venue was hosting a reception for 180 guests. They had ordered a top-tier premium open bar for the entire night, meaning people were drinking expensive liquor for hours on end. There was a massive charge for a famous live band to play throughout the evening, an expense that cost more than my car. And to top it all off, there was a huge fee for a private fireworks show over the ocean. I did the math in my head as I read down the ridiculous list of luxury items. The total cost for the entire wedding was exactly $89,000. According to the billing sheet, my brother Brandon had only paid a deposit of $16,600. That left a remaining balance of exactly $72,400. That was the exact number they were now legally demanding from me. It was more than half my annual salary, gone in one night. The entire situation was unbelievable, but the wedding planner had also forwarded me an email chain to explain why they were contacting me today. I opened the thread and started reading from the bottom up to see the history. It was a long chain of emails between Brandon and the venue's finance team, dating back months. In one of the emails, Brandon explicitly wrote, "My sister Olivia will pay the rest as a wedding gift." He actually told them I was covering the entire remaining balance as my present to him and Jessica. He offered up $72,000 of my hard-earned money without even telling me. I kept reading, and my anger quickly turned into intense disgust. In his final email to the venue, Brandon wrote, "Don't send the invoice before the wedding to keep it a secret." He had planned this entire thing from the very beginning. He deliberately instructed them not to bill me until after the wedding was completely over so I wouldn't find out and cancel the event before it happened. He wanted to trap me with the bill after the fireworks went off and the guests went home. He knew exactly what he was doing. I didn't even have time to fully process the anger and betrayal before my phone started ringing again. This time, the caller ID showed my brother's name. Brandon was calling me right after the venue must have contacted him to report my reaction. He clearly realized his plan was failing. I answered the phone and put it on speaker, placing the device hard on my kitchen counter. "Why did you tell the venue you aren't paying?" Brandon demanded the second the call connected. He didn't say hello, he didn't ask how my flight back was, he didn't even ask how my weekend went. He just immediately went on the attack, sounding annoyed and impatient, like I was a child who forgot to do her chores. I gripped the edge of the granite counter, my knuckles turning completely white. "You forged my signature, Brandon," I said, speaking loudly and clearly. "You gave them my information, you lied about a gift, and you forged my name on a $72,000 contract." He made a dismissive noise on the other end of the line, sounding completely unbothered by the fact that I had just accused him of committing major financial fraud. "You make over $120K a year," Brandon said quickly. "You can afford it." I actually laughed out loud, a harsh, loud sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was trying to justify stealing from me because I worked hard and got a good job. "I can afford it," I yelled at the phone, losing my temper completely. "You literally didn't even let me into the wedding. I flew across the entire country with a gift, and Mom had security kick me out before I could even step onto the grass. I stood outside while your friends stared at me. And now you expect me to pay for your open bar and your stupid fireworks." There was a brief pause on his end. He didn't apologize. He didn't even have the basic decency to sound guilty for what happened on Saturday. "That was Jessica's decision," Brandon said flatly, completely blaming his new wife to justify my exclusion. He wanted me to pay for the party, but he was perfectly fine letting his bride humiliate me at the front door. I stood there, listening to the static on the phone, realizing that he genuinely thought this was a perfectly normal way to treat me. He truly believed that I existed simply to fund his lifestyle, regardless of how he or his wife treated me in return. I thought about Jessica for a second. She never liked me. She always complained when I didn't buy them expensive enough gifts for holidays, and she hated whenever Brandon had to spend time with our family if it didn't benefit her directly. Banning me from the wedding was entirely her style, but making me pay for it was a calculated team effort between the two of them. I hung up the phone on Brandon and threw it onto the couch. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit down on the floor right there in the living room. He actually believed I was going to pay for a wedding I was banned from, simply because I make over $120K a year. To him, my hard work and my salary were just an extension of his own bank account. I sat there trying to process the absolute insanity of the situation. My own brother had handed me a $72,000 bill for a party he knew I wasn't allowed to attend. He even admitted that it was Jessica's decision to ban me from the venue. They had planned this together. Jessica got to have her perfect, aesthetic, Olivia-free wedding, and Brandon got to have his premium open bar and fireworks without spending a dime of his own money. It was the perfect scam, executed by the two people who were supposed to be building a life together. I needed to call the venue back. I needed to call the police. I needed to freeze my credit. My mind was racing through a million logical next steps, but my body felt like it was encased in concrete. Before I could even stand up to reach for my laptop, my phone started ringing again. The screen lit up, and this time, the caller ID showed my mother's name. Linda Carter. Part of me didn't want to answer it. Part of me wanted to block her number and never speak to any of them again. But a smaller, more desperate part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, my mother didn't know the full extent of what Brandon had done. Maybe she was calling to apologize for her behavior at the door on Saturday. Maybe she was calling because Brandon had told her about the bill and she was horrified. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and hit the green accept button. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Olivia, what on earth is your brother telling me about you calling the wedding venue and causing a scene?" my mother snapped. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing. Her voice was sharp, annoyed, and dripping with that familiar disappointment she always reserved just for me. I blinked, completely caught off guard by her aggressive tone. "Causing a scene? Mom, the venue just called me and told me I owe them over $72,000. Brandon put my name down as the financial guarantor for his wedding. He committed fraud." "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Olivia," she sighed loudly into the receiver. "Nobody committed fraud. You are overreacting as usual. Brandon just needed a little help securing the venue because his and Jessica's credit wasn't quite high enough for the final deposit. It's really not a big deal." "Not a big deal," I practically screamed, pushing myself up off the floor. "Mom, they have a legally binding contract with my name and my forged signature on it. They are demanding I pay them $72,000 for a wedding you literally had me thrown out of. How is that not a big deal?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to her. Maybe hearing the actual dollar amount or the word forged had snapped her back to reality. But then she spoke again, and what she said completely destroyed whatever tiny shred of love and respect I had left for her. "Brandon didn't forge your signature, Olivia," my mother said calmly, her tone completely even. "I was the one who signed your name." I stopped breathing. The room started to spin. I literally had to lean against the wall to keep from falling over. My mother. The woman who raised me. The woman who had looked me dead in the eye 4 days ago and told me I wasn't welcome at her son's wedding. She was the one who had committed a felony to steal from me. You what?" I stammered, my brain completely unable to process the words coming out of her mouth. "I signed the paperwork for him," she repeated, sounding slightly irritated that I was making her say it twice. "Brandon sent me the documents, and I signed your name on the guarantor line. He said you would handle the final bill as a wedding gift to them. You know family has to help each other. Family has to help each other." That was her justification for identity theft. That was her excuse for attempting to steal my life savings. Are you out of your mind? I yelled, tears of pure, unadulterated rage finally spilling down my cheeks. You stole my identity. You signed my name on a financial contract without my permission. That is a crime, Mom. You could go to jail for that. Don't you dare threaten me with jail, Olivia Carter, she yelled back, her voice suddenly turning vicious. After everything this family has done for you, Brandon is your older brother. He deserved to have a beautiful wedding. You have a great job, you have no husband, no kids, and you make more than enough money. You can afford to do this one nice thing for him. I flew to California to do a nice thing for him. I shot back, my voice shaking with fury. I brought a $500 espresso machine as a gift. And you stood at the gate with security and treated me like a criminal. You didn't even let me eat a piece of the cake I am apparently supposed to pay for. That was different, my mother said dismissively. Jessica was very stressed out. It was her special day, and she didn't want any negative energy around. You two have never gotten along, and she felt your presence would ruin the aesthetic of the photos. It was nothing personal, Olivia. You just need to be more understanding of her feelings. Understanding of her feelings. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. She bans me from her wedding because I don't fit her aesthetic, but she is perfectly happy to let me foot the bill for her premium liquor and her private fireworks? And you helped them do it? You actually sat down, forged my signature, and then stood at the door like a bouncer to keep me out. You are being incredibly selfish right now, my mother said coldly. We are family. Brandon needed this. Jessica's family expected a certain level of luxury, and we couldn't let them down. You have the money sitting in your bank account doing nothing. Why are you trying to ruin your brother's happiness over some stupid piece of paper? I realized in that exact moment that there was absolutely no getting through to her. To my mother, Brandon was the sun, and I was just a satellite existing solely to keep him warm. She genuinely believed that she had done nothing wrong. She truly thought that because I had money, it belonged to Brandon by default. My feelings, my financial security, and my consent didn't matter at all. The only thing that mattered was giving her golden boy exactly what he wanted. Listen to me very carefully, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly serious whisper. I am not paying a single cent to that venue. Not one dime. I am going to call them back right now, and I am going to tell them that the signature is forged. I am going to tell them exactly who forged it. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, a hint of panic finally creeping into her voice. You will ruin his marriage. You will ruin my reputation. If you do this, Olivia, you are dead to me. You already killed whatever relationship we had the second you signed my name, I replied flatly. And you buried it when you had security escort me off the property. You and Brandon can figure out how to pay for the fireworks yourselves. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't want to hear another word of her toxic manipulation. I walked into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. My family had just declared war on me, and for the first time in my entire life, I was absolutely ready to fight back. I walked back to the kitchen, grabbed my laptop, and opened the email thread with the wedding venue. It was time to show Brandon and my mother that I was no longer the quiet, compliant little sister they could just step all over. The moment my phone screen went dark after hanging up on my mother, a strange sense of absolute clarity washed over me. I wasn't just sad or angry anymore. I was highly motivated. I marched straight to my home office, opened my laptop, and found the direct number for the venue manager who had called me just an hour earlier. I dialed the number, and she picked up on the second ring, probably expecting me to happily give her a credit card number to clear the balance. Instead, I gave her a massive reality check. I told her in no uncertain terms that the contract she was holding in her hands was completely fraudulent. I explained that I had never seen that document, I had never agreed to pay for anything, and my signature had been blatantly forged by my own family members. The manager's polite, polished customer service voice instantly vanished, replaced by a tense, nervous stutter. She tried to firmly tell me that a signed contract was binding, but I immediately cut her off. I told her I was hanging up and contacting the police to file a formal report for identity theft and wire fraud. That got her attention. Corporate luxury venues do not want the police involved in their high-end weddings, and they definitely do not want to be caught holding a forged financial document. The manager quickly put me on a brief hold, and when she came back on the line, she sounded completely different. She told me the venue had to launch a full investigation into the matter. She asked me not to file a police report just yet, promising that their internal corporate legal team would review the file and get back to me within 24 hours. I didn't listen to her entirely. I knew I couldn't just trust the wedding venue to do the right thing when they were desperate to recover $72,000. I needed my own protection, and I needed it fast. I immediately started searching online for contract lawyers in Austin. I found a highly rated attorney named David who specialized in fraud and financial contract disputes. I called his office, explained the absolute emergency of the situation, and practically begged the receptionist for a same-day consultation. Thankfully, someone had just canceled their afternoon appointment, so I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove straight to his downtown office. Sitting in David's quiet, professional office was the first time I felt like I could actually breathe since the initial phone call that morning. I showed him the forwarded emails, the ridiculous itemized bill for the open bar and fireworks, and the fake, loopy signature on the PDF file. I told him everything from the beginning. I told him about the wedding I was physically banned from attending, my brother's secret emails instructing the venue to hide the bill from me, and the final nail in the coffin, my mother's arrogant verbal confession on the phone that she was the one who actually signed my name. David listened quietly, taking detailed notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished talking, he leaned back in his leather chair and took off his glasses. He looked me dead in the eye and told me that what my mother and brother had done wasn't just a toxic family disagreement, it was a very serious felony. David didn't waste any time. While I sat right there in front of his desk, he drafted a formal, heavily worded legal letter addressed to the Malibu wedding venue's corporate management and their entire legal department. In the letter, he stated clearly that his client, Olivia Carter, was the victim of identity theft. He demanded all digital timestamps, IP addresses, and correspondence related to the signing of the digital contract. He made it crystal clear that if they attempted to collect a single penny from me or put this massive debt on my credit report, we would immediately sue them for extortion and involve law enforcement. He hit send on that email, and then we waited. The next 48 hours were incredibly stressful. I had to take 2 days off from my software engineering job because I couldn't focus on writing code while my entire financial life was hanging in the balance. I stayed in my apartment, jumping every time my phone buzzed or I got an email notification. My mother tried to call me 6 more times, but I had blocked her number completely. Brandon texted me twice, furious that the venue had frozen their newlywed account and was asking them suspicious questions, but I ignored those messages too. I was letting my lawyer handle everything, just like he advised me to do. On Wednesday morning, the breakthrough finally happened. David called me with major updates from the venue's legal team. Faced with the serious threat of a police investigation and a major lawsuit, the venue had dug deep into the digital footprint of the contract. The e-signature software they used tracked the IP address of the device where the document was actually signed. Surprise, surprise, the IP address did not originate from Austin, Texas, where I live and work. It originated from a device located at my parents' house in a completely different city. Furthermore, there was absolutely no email trail of the contract ever being sent to my personal email address for review before it was signed. Brandon had completely bypassed me, sending the link directly to our mother. Armed with this undeniable technical evidence, my lawyer ultimately concluded and proved that the signature was definitively forged. There was absolutely no legal way they could hold me responsible. The venue's corporate legal team had to concede defeat. They realized they had been played and manipulated by Brandon just as much as I had. Brandon had lied to them to secure the booking, assuming he could just force me to pay the bill after the fireworks went off. The venue officially backed down. David forwarded me a formal release letter from the venue's corporate office. It stated in plain legal English that I was officially cleared of having any legal responsibility for the bill. My name was completely removed from their system, the fraudulent contract was voided, and they promised in writing that no negative reports would be made to any credit bureaus under my name. I printed that release letter out and just stared at it on my kitchen counter for a long time. It was over. I had actually won. I wasn't going to lose my life savings, and I wasn't going to be financially ruined by a party I was literally kicked out of. But the story was far from over for my brother and my new sister-in-law. Because the luxury venue still desperately wanted their money, and they were furious about being defrauded. Since the fraudulent guarantor contract was voided, the financial liability defaulted back to the primary account holders who actually hosted the event. The massive debt was immediately transferred back to Brandon and Jessica. They were now legally on the hook for the entire $72,400 balance. The venue gave them a strict 30-day deadline to pay the invoice in full, or they would be the ones facing a massive lawsuit and having their wages garnished. The very trap Brandon had carefully laid out for me had just snapped completely shut on his own leg. I sat on my couch with a cup of hot tea, feeling a strange mix of deep relief and profound sadness. I had protected myself, but in doing so, I had officially nuked my relationship with my family. There was no going back from this point. They had tried to destroy me financially, and I had handed the ticking bomb right back to them. I knew the fallout was going to be massive. Brandon and Jessica were just starting their new life together, and instead of enjoying their honeymoon phase, they were about to face a crushing mountain of debt. And honestly, for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt about not saving them. Before I left David's office that day, he gave me some of the best advice I had ever received. He told me that in his years of practicing law, he had seen money destroy countless families, but it usually happened because one person kept allowing themselves to be the victim. "You stopped being the victim today, Olivia," he had said, shaking my hand firmly. "Do not let them make you feel guilty for defending yourself against a crime." I kept repeating those exact words in my head. Defending yourself against a crime. That is exactly what I had done. I wasn't being vindictive. I wasn't being petty. I was just refusing to be their collateral damage anymore. I spent the rest of that Wednesday evening securing the rest of my life. I called my bank, put extra security passwords on all my accounts, and officially locked my credit with all 3 major bureaus. If my mother was willing to forge my signature on a wedding venue contract, who knew what else she might try to sign my name on? I had to treat my own parents like hostile scammers. It was a heartbreaking reality to accept, but it was absolutely necessary for my survival. I went to bed that night and slept soundly for the first time since I had returned from California. The nightmare of the debt was gone, but I knew the storm from my brother was just gathering on the horizon. The days following my lawyer's letter were completely quiet on my end, but I knew it was absolute chaos back in California. The luxury venue was not messing around anymore. Since the fraudulent contract with my forged signature was legally voided, the financial liability dropped right back onto the primary account holders. They gave Brandon and Jessica exactly 30 days to come up with the remaining $72,400. If they failed to pay the balance in full by that deadline, the venue's corporate legal team was going to take them to court, sue them for the entire amount plus legal fees, and start garnishing their wages. My brother had lived his entire 33 years on this earth completely shielded from the consequences of his own actions. My parents always bailed him out, and when they couldn't, they manipulated me into doing it. But this time was entirely different. My parents couldn't just write a check to fix this. 72 grand in cash wasn't something my mom and dad had sitting in their savings account. For the very first time in his life, Brandon was standing on the edge of a massive financial cliff, and I had completely refused to be his safety net. It took exactly 1 week for him to call me again. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was sitting at my kitchen island, eating dinner and looking out the window. When his name popped up on my phone screen, I almost just hit the decline button. I really didn't want to hear his voice. But a small, curious part of me needed to hear what he had to say now that his grand extortion plan had spectacularly failed. I picked up the phone, accepted the call, and pressed it to my ear without saying a single word. "Olivia, please don't hang up," Brandon said immediately. His voice sounded completely unrecognizable. He wasn't arrogant, he wasn't demanding, and he wasn't yelling at me like he was a few days ago. He sounded exhausted, terrified, and completely desperate. "I need your help," he pleaded, the words spilling out of his mouth in a frantic, shaky rush. "You have to help us. The venue is threatening to take us to court. They are going to ruin our lives over this bill." I leaned back against my kitchen counter and just listened. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity for him, but I was genuinely surprised by how fast his tone had shifted. Just last week, he was barking orders at me over the phone, telling me I could easily afford his premium open bar simply because I had a good salary. Now, he was practically crying through the speaker. "We are losing everything," Brandon continued, his voice cracking slightly. "We had to completely cancel the honeymoon to Europe. We were supposed to leave on Friday. The travel agency only gave us a partial refund because we canceled so close to the departure date, and every single penny of that refund went straight to the venue just to keep them from filing the lawsuit this week. Jessica is absolutely devastated. She has been crying in the bedroom for 3 days straight. She won't even talk to me." I thought about Jessica crying over her lost European vacation, and honestly, I felt absolutely nothing. She was the woman who decided I wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough to eat a piece of dry chicken at her wedding reception. She wanted the absolute highest tier of luxury for her special day, but she fully expected my bank account to fund it. Now she was facing the brutal reality of her own incredibly expensive tastes. They were supposed to be walking around the streets of Paris or Rome, taking hundreds of perfect photos for social media. Instead, they were locked in their apartment, completely suffocating under a mountain of debt before their marriage had even really started. But the cancelled honeymoon wasn't even the worst part of his situation. "I have to sell my car, Olivia," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a miserable whisper. "I have to sell the new Tesla. I just bought it 3 months ago. The dealership is offering me way less than what I owe on the financing, but I have to take the loss just to scrape together some actual cash to give the venue. I'm going to have to take the bus to work. I have to take the public bus because we don't have any money left to buy a cheap used car." He paused, clearly expecting me to gasp in horror, and immediately offered to write him a massive check to save his precious vehicle. He had always been deeply obsessed with his image. Driving a brand new Tesla was a huge part of the successful, wealthy persona he desperately wanted to project to his friends and coworkers. Losing that car was a massive, humiliating blow to his ego. He thought telling me he had to ride the bus would break my heart, but I just stayed quiet and let the dead silence stretch on. When he finally realized I wasn't going to interrupt him to offer a financial bailout, he kept talking. "Even with the honeymoon refund and selling the car at a loss, we are still tens of thousands of dollars short. We had to go to the bank yesterday to apply for a massive personal loan to cover the rest of the venue invoice. Do you know what the interest rates are right now? They are absolutely insane. The bank approved us, but we are going to be paying this loan off for 7 years. 7 whole years, Olivia. Every single month, a huge chunk of our combined paychecks is going to go toward paying off a party that lasted 6 hours. We can't buy a house now. We can't start a family. We can't even afford to go out to a nice dinner. We are completely trapped." He was absolutely right. Taking out a massive personal loan with a high interest rate is a complete financial death sentence for a young couple just starting their life together. They were going to spend the next 7 years of their lives actively paying for expensive champagne that their guests had already forgotten about, and a private fireworks show that literally blew up and vanished into the night sky in 10 minutes. It was a staggering, life-altering amount of debt to carry just for a single night of showing off to people they barely cared about. And the absolute worst part for him was that he knew it was entirely his own fault. His brilliant plan to trick me had completely destroyed his own future. "Please, Olivia," Brandon begged, dropping all of his remaining pride. Just loan us half of it. Just give us $30,000 to get the bank loan down to a manageable number. I swear on my life I will pay you back every single cent. You know I will. We are family. You can't just sit there in Texas and watch my life fall apart when you have the money sitting in your bank account to stop it. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart rate stay completely steady. I thought about the heavy wedding gift I carried all the way from Austin. I thought about the security guards stepping up behind my mother to intimidate me at the front gate. I thought about the forged signature on the financial contract, and my mother telling me I was selfish for not wanting to be robbed blind. I am watching your life fall apart, Brandon, I said calmly, my voice totally flat. And I am not going to stop it. You tried to steal $72,000 from me. You and Mom actually committed fraud. You lied to the venue, you lied to me, and you thought you could just trap me into paying for your luxury lifestyle. You didn't even have the basic human decency to let me walk into the venue to watch you get married. I already told you that was Jessica's fault, he yelled, his desperation briefly flashing back into anger. She was stressed out. You are punishing me for something my wife did. You are a team now, I replied firmly. She wanted the perfect aesthetic without me there, and you wanted the premium open bar without paying for it. You two made those choices together, and now you can pay for them together. Do not call me asking for money ever again. Enjoy the bus. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in 27 years, I was completely free from the financial anchor of my family. They were finally learning that actions have very real, very expensive consequences. After I blocked Brandon's number and hung up that Tuesday evening, my apartment became incredibly quiet. For the first time in my 27 years of life, I was completely estranged from my entire family. No passive-aggressive texts from my mother, Linda, no demanding phone calls from my brother, Brandon, and absolute silence from my quiet father, Robert, who always just took my mother's side anyway to avoid conflict. It was a weird, heavy kind of isolation that I wasn't prepared for. I woke up every single morning, made my dark coffee, in a new mug, since I shattered the other one on the kitchen floor the day the venue called, and went to my demanding job as a software engineer at the tech company here in Austin, Texas. I wrote lines of code, I attended virtual meetings, I smiled at my coworkers, and then I came home to an empty, quiet space. I really thought I would feel totally liberated after officially cutting them off and securing my finances, but the emotional reality was much more complicated than simply winning a legal dispute. I felt like an orphan. I spent my weekends just walking around the city, grabbing takeout food, and feeling completely disconnected from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The holidays were slowly approaching, and the reality of my isolation really started to set in hard. My coworkers would stand around the break room and talk about their family plans, booking expensive flights back home, and buying thoughtful gifts for their siblings and parents. I would just smile politely and nod, not wanting to explain to anyone that my own mother had literally stood next to a security guard and physically blocked me from entering my older brother's wedding. I couldn't exactly tell my friends at Friday happy hour that my brother, who used to brag about his perfect life, was currently riding the public city bus every morning because he had to sell his brand new Tesla to avoid a massive corporate lawsuit. The truth of my family dynamic was just too embarrassing, too toxic, and too painful to share with normal people who had loving families. So I kept it all to myself, bottling up the deep betrayal and the crushing loneliness. Sometimes, late at night when the apartment was completely silent, I would look at the contact list on my phone. I saw my mom's blocked number. I saw Brandon's blocked number. I even stared at my dad's number, wondering if he even knew the full extent of the fraud my mother and brother had committed when she signed my name on that $72,000 contract. But I never pressed the call button. I knew that breaking the silence meant inviting the chaos back into my life, and I absolutely couldn't afford to be their financial backup plan ever again. Exactly 1 month passed since the day the luxury wedding venue in Malibu first called to demand my money. 30 days of total, uninterrupted silence. It was a typical Thursday night, and I was sitting on my living room couch watching a documentary, trying to shut my brain off after a long, exhausting week of coding software. My phone suddenly buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the glowing screen, fully expecting it to be a work notification or a food delivery driver letting me know my dinner was downstairs. Instead, I saw a familiar area code. It wasn't Brandon's exact cell phone number, because I still had his primary number blocked, but it was definitely a California number. I stared at it for a few tense seconds. My heart rate immediately picked up. I knew logically that I shouldn't answer it, but the overwhelming isolation and the tiny, pathetic, lingering hope that someone in my family was finally calling to genuinely apologize made me reach for the phone. I swiped right and slowly brought the device to my ear. "Hello," I said cautiously into the receiver.
"Olivia."
"It's me," a voice replied. It was Brandon. He must have borrowed a coworker's phone or bought a cheap burner phone just to get around my digital block. He sounded completely defeated. The arrogant anger and the frantic panic from our last conversation were totally gone. He just sounded incredibly tired, like the massive weight of his brand new 7-year bank loan and his completely ruined European honeymoon had physically crushed the life out of him. I didn't hang up immediately, even though my brain was screaming at me to end the call. "What do you want, Brandon? I told you not to contact me about the money." "I'm not calling about the money," he said quietly, his voice lacking any of its usual confidence. "We figured it out." "Well, we didn't figure it out, but the venue got paid. The bank gave us the massive personal loan. The money is gone. We are paying for it now. Every single month." I sat up straight on the couch, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders. "Okay. So why are you calling me from a strange number on a Thursday night?" There was a very long pause on his end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic passing by in the background. He was probably waiting at a public bus stop in the cold. I've been thinking a lot for the past month," Brandon finally said, his voice barely above a raspy whisper. "About everything. About Jessica banning you from the venue because you didn't fit her aesthetic, about Mom forging your signature on the guarantor line, about the $72,000, about all of it." And I pushed firmly, absolutely not willing to give him even a single inch of unearned sympathy. "And I just need to know something," he continued, taking a shaky, audible breath through the phone. "I just need to ask you one question, Olivia, and then I swear I will leave you alone forever if that's what you really want." I gripped the edge of my phone so hard my fingers ached. "Ask it." "If I had just come to you first," Brandon started, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "If I hadn't lied to the wedding planner to hide the bill. If I hadn't told Mom to forge your name on the contract. If I had just called you in Austin before the wedding weekend, told you that we were completely drowning in the luxury costs, and just asked you for help. If I had asked you directly to help us pay for the reception, would you have helped me?" That specific question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was the absolute tragic, heartbreaking core of this entire nightmare. He had spent weeks orchestrating this elaborate, illegal scam to force me into paying for his extravagant lifestyle because he just assumed I would say no to his face. He treated me like a broken ATM that he needed to hack into, instead of a living, breathing sister he could just talk to. I thought about how hard I worked as a software engineer to build my savings. I thought about how I always stepped up to help the family when they needed financial support, even when they treated me like an afterthought my entire life. I thought about the expensive espresso machine I had bought as their wedding gift, and the flight I booked just to celebrate his new marriage. I actually loved my older brother. Despite all the blatant favoritism and the toxic behavior from our parents, I had always desperately wanted to be a part of his life. I closed my eyes, feeling a single, hot tear roll down my cheek. The absolute stupidity of his actions was just devastating to process. "Brandon," I said, my voice completely steady but laced with a profound, heavy sadness. "If you had just treated me like a human being, if you had just called me up, told me you made a massive mistake with your budget, and asked me to help save your wedding, I took a deep breath. I probably would have paid the whole thing. I heard a sharp, painful intake of breath on the other end of the line. And then there was just silence. Complete, suffocating, crushing silence. He didn't say another word. He couldn't. The brutal reality of what I had just said was settling heavily over him. He realized in that exact moment that he hadn't needed to lie, cheat, or steal from me. He hadn't needed to have our mother commit a serious felony. He hadn't needed to hide the expensive invoice or let his new wife kick me out of the venue like a trespasser. If he had just shown me a tiny shred of basic respect and brotherly love, I would have happily written him a massive check to make sure he had a perfect day. My high salary and my savings were never the issue. The real issue was his complete lack of respect for me as a person. We stayed on the phone in that dead silence for what felt like an absolute eternity. I could almost hear the profound regret physically tearing him apart through the phone. He had traded a loyal, loving sister who would have gladly given him the world for a premium open bar, a 10-minute fireworks show, and 7 years of crippling bank debt. He had lost his Tesla, his European honeymoon, and his family, all because he chose manipulation over basic honesty. I didn't wait for him to find the words to respond. There was absolutely nothing left to say. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button to end the call, and set the phone back down on the coffee table. The apartment was quiet again, but this time, the isolation didn't feel heavy or painful. It finally felt like closure. December arrived in Austin with a sudden chill, bringing with it the unavoidable reality of the holiday season. Everywhere I went, the city was covered in twinkling lights and festive decorations, constantly reminding me of the fractured state of my own family. After that heavy, silent phone call with Brandon in November, I honestly expected to spend Christmas completely alone in my apartment, ordering Chinese takeout and watching old movies. I was prepared for that. I had made my peace with the isolation. But then, about 2 weeks before Christmas, an unexpected email popped up in my inbox. It was from my father, Robert. He rarely reached out on his own, always letting my mother dictate the family communication. The email was short, carefully worded, and shockingly polite. My family was officially inviting me to come back home to California for the Christmas holiday. I stared at the invitation on my screen for 3 days before I finally replied. A huge part of me wanted to decline. Why would I voluntarily walk back into the lion's den after they had just tried to ruin me financially? But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good Christmases we had when we were just kids, felt a strange pull. I realized that if I was ever going to truly move forward, I needed to face them not as the compliant, easily manipulated little sister, but as the independent woman who had successfully stood her ground. I wasn't going to go back to be their punching bag, and I certainly wasn't going to go back to hand out expensive gifts. I was going back to look them in the eye and establish my permanent boundaries in person. So I booked a flight, packed a small suitcase, and prepared myself for the most awkward holiday gathering of my entire life. Walking up the driveway of my parents' house on Christmas Eve felt entirely different than it had just a few months prior. The house wasn't decorated with the usual lavish, over-the-top lights my mother usually insisted on. Everything looked a bit subdued, a bit quieter. I knocked on the front door, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. My father opened the door. He looked older, tired, but he offered me a genuine, albeit small, smile and pulled me into a brief hug. As I stepped into the living room, the tension in the air was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Brandon and Jessica were sitting on the far end of the couch. They looked completely different from the glowing, arrogant couple I had briefly seen at that Malibu oceanfront villa. Jessica wasn't wearing designer clothes. She was in a plain sweater, staring at her hands and barely making eye contact with me. Brandon looked like he had aged 5 years. The dark circles under his eyes were a clear testament to the crushing reality of the massive 7-year bank loan they were now paying off every single month. My mother, Linda, was standing near the fireplace, nervously holding a cup of coffee. This was the same woman who had coldly told me I was ruining her son's happiness, the same woman who had physically blocked me from entering the wedding venue, and the same woman who had forged my signature to steal $72,000 from me. Nobody said a word for what felt like an eternity. I just stood there in the entryway, not taking off my coat, waiting to see exactly why they had asked me to fly all the way here. I wasn't going to break the ice for them. Finally, my mother took a step forward. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her usual dominating posture was completely gone. She looked at me, took a shaky breath, and did something I never ever thought I would witness in my lifetime. She actually apologized to me. "Olivia," she started, her voice cracking in the quiet room. "I am so deeply sorry for what I did to you." I didn't interrupt her. I just let her speak, needing to hear every single word. "I was wrong," my mother continued, tears finally welling up in her eyes. "I was so blindingly focused on giving Brandon the perfect day that I completely lost my mind. I convinced myself that because you had money, it was okay to take it. I treated you terribly at the venue, and forging your name was unforgivable. I broke the law, and worse, I broke my relationship with my own daughter. I am so sorry." Hearing my mother apologize was a surreal experience. For 27 years, she had never admitted fault for anything, especially when it came to her blatant favoritism of Brandon. I didn't rush forward to hug her. I didn't immediately tell her that everything was fine and forgiven, because it wasn't. The trauma of the past few months couldn't be erased by a single apology on Christmas Eve. But I nodded slowly, acknowledging that she had finally taken the very first step toward reality. Then, Brandon stood up from the couch. He walked over and stood next to our mother, looking at the floor before finally meeting my gaze. The arrogance that used to define his entire personality was completely gone, replaced by a heavy, humiliating defeat. "She's right, Olivia," Brandon said quietly. "We both completely lost our minds. We got so caught up in the aesthetic, the luxury, and showing off to people who don't even care about us. I put myself in massive debt, and then I tried to force you to carry the burden." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "I honestly thought you would always just save me." There it was. The absolute, unfiltered truth of our entire family dynamic, spoken out loud for the very first time. He had built his entire life on the assumption that my hard work existed as a safety net for his reckless decisions. He thought my role in the family was to be the quiet, reliable bank account that would step in to fix his mistakes so he could continue living his perfect, consequence-free life. He thought he could ban me from his wedding and still comfortably rely on me to save him from financial ruin. I looked at my brother, feeling a strange mix of pity and absolute resolve. I didn't feel the urge to scream at him anymore. The anger had burned out, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. "You're right, Brandon," I said, my voice calm but incredibly firm, echoing slightly in the quiet living room. "I used to save you. I used to think that buying your love and keeping the peace was just what I was supposed to do. But not anymore." I looked around the room, making sure my parents and Jessica were all listening closely to what I was about to say next. "I am still family, but I am no longer your wallet." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I saw Brandon swallow hard, nodding slowly in understanding. Jessica kept her eyes glued to the floor, clearly uncomfortable but unable to argue. My parents just stood there, absorbing the new reality of our family structure. I wasn't cutting them off forever, but the terms of our relationship had permanently changed. Sitting down in that living room later that evening, holding a mug of hot cider, I realized a profound truth that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Being a family is not a free pass to exploit someone. Blood relation does not give anyone the right to cross financial boundaries, commit fraud, or treat a sibling like a second-class citizen just to fund a luxury lifestyle. I had learned the hard way that genuine respect is vastly more important than money. Without basic respect, no amount of expensive wedding gifts or financial bailouts would ever earn me a real place at their table. The greatest gift I gave my brother that year wasn't a $72,000 check for his premium open bar and his 10-minute fireworks show. The greatest gift I gave him was stepping back and forcing him to face reality. Sometimes, truly growing up means you have to completely stop saving the people you love from the consequences of their own actions. Brandon and Jessica were going to spend the next 7 years paying off that wedding, riding the bus, and learning how to actually budget their lives. It was going to be hard, it was going to be painful, but it was exactly what they needed to do to grow up. And as for me, I finally had the peace of mind knowing that my future, my savings, and my self-respect belonged entirely to me. The flight back to Austin, Texas, after that Christmas gathering felt completely different from any other flight I had ever taken in my life. When I had flown out to California for the wedding, I was carrying a heavy, expensive gift, wearing a simple but nice dress, and dragging along 27 years of emotional baggage, desperately hoping to finally be accepted by my family. I had arrived at that breathtaking oceanfront villa in Malibu, only to be turned away at the door by my own mother, Linda, because my new sister-in-law, Jessica, didn't want me there. But this time, flying home after the holidays, my suitcase was light, and my conscience was even lighter. I sat by the window, watching the clouds pass by, and for the first time in my entire existence, I wasn't worried about my brother Brandon. I wasn't calculating how much of my savings I would need to drain to fix his next inevitable mistake. I was finally just Olivia Carter, a 27-year-old software engineer, heading back to her own quiet, peaceful life. It has been exactly a year since the day of that infamous wedding, and let me tell you, time has a funny way of leveling the playing field. There was no lavish first anniversary party for Brandon and Jessica. There were no extravagant social media posts about them sipping champagne on a beach. The brutal reality of their financial situation has completely consumed their daily lives. They are still actively paying off that massive bank loan, and they still have 6 long years left on the repayment plan. Every single month, a huge chunk of their combined income vanishes into thin air to pay for an $89,000 party that lasted exactly 1 evening. Brandon is still taking the public bus to work every single morning because he had to sell his brand new Tesla to keep the venue from suing them. I heard from my dad that Brandon absolutely hates the bus. He hates waiting in the rain, and he hates that his co-workers see him arrive on public transit instead of pulling up in a luxury electric vehicle. But that is the price you pay when you prioritize a 10-minute fireworks show and a premium open bar over your actual financial stability. Jessica's life has changed drastically too. The woman who banned me from her wedding because I didn't fit her high-end aesthetic is now living a life completely devoid of luxury. She had to cancel her dream honeymoon to Europe, losing a significant amount of money in the process just to use the partial refund to pay down the venue debt. She can't afford designer clothes, expensive dinners, or the upscale lifestyle she desperately wanted to project to her friends. Their entire marriage is currently defined by strict budgeting and endless financial stress. They are living the exact life they tried to force onto me. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about that phone call where Brandon asked me if I would have helped them if he had just asked me directly instead of lying. I told him that I probably would have paid the entire $72,400 balance without hesitation. And that is the absolute most tragic part of this whole story. They could have had their perfect day, their Tesla, and their European honeymoon if they had simply treated me like a human being instead of a bank account to be hacked. My relationship with my parents is fundamentally different now. My mother, Linda, who always fiercely defended Brandon and who literally forged my signature on that financial guarantor contract because she believed family has to help each other, finally understands that my boundaries are absolute. She calls me about once a week now. The conversations are brief, polite, and completely superficial. She asks about the weather in Austin, she asks about my coding projects at the tech company, and she tells me about her garden. But she never, ever asks me for money. She knows that if she even hints at me opening my wallet for Brandon, I will hang up the phone and never speak to her again. My father, Robert, is still a quiet man who avoids conflict, but I can tell he respects me a lot more now. They both witnessed me stand my ground during Christmas when I looked Brandon in the eye and told him that while I am still family, I am no longer his wallet. They know I mean it. The days of Olivia bailing out the golden child are permanently over. As for me, my life in Austin has never been better. Without the constant anxiety of my family's financial demands hanging over my head, I have been able to fully focus on my career. I recently got a promotion at work, pushing my salary well past the $120,000 Brandon used to throw in my face as an excuse to steal from me. I upgraded my apartment, I started traveling for fun, and I have built an amazing circle of friends who love and support me without asking for a single dime in return. I don't feel like an orphan anymore. I feel like an independent adult who successfully escaped a highly toxic environment. Looking back at the entire nightmare, the humiliation at the venue gates, the shock of the luxury venue calling my phone, the forged signature, and the intense legal battle, I realized that getting that $72,000 bill was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the catalyst I desperately needed to finally break the cycle. If they hadn't been so greedy, if they had just asked me for a few $1,000s here and there, I probably would have kept paying it. I would have kept sacrificing my own financial security to buy their temporary approval. But they pushed too far. They tried to ruin me financially, and in doing so, they accidentally set me completely free. I learned a lot of hard lessons over the past year, but a few core truths will stick with me for the rest of my life. First, being a family is not a license to exploit someone. Sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to steal your identity, drain your bank account, or treat you like a second-class citizen. Second, basic respect is vastly more important than money. You cannot buy genuine love, and you cannot force people to respect you by simply funding their bad decisions. And finally, I learned that sometimes, truly growing up means you have to completely stop saving the people you love from the consequences of their own actions. Brandon and Jessica made their bed, and now they have to sleep in it, debt and all. I still drink my black coffee every morning, sitting at my kitchen island in Texas. Sometimes, my phone buzzes with an unknown number, and I still get a tiny spike of anxiety, wondering if it's another venue, another fake contract, or another family scam. But then I remember that my credit is permanently locked, my lawyer is on speed dial, and my spine is made of steel. I wasn't invited to my brother's wedding, and they tried to send me the massive bill. But in the end, I was the only one who walked away truly rich.